Hello and welcome everybody to our webinar today. We'll be talking about investing in the digital future of aquaculture. With me today are Nolan Paul, a partner at Yamaha Motors Ventures. Still to arrive is Martin Goodberlet, the managing director of Bade, who should be here momentarily. Trond Kathenes, from the CIO of Grieg Seafood, and of course our own managing partner and co-founder at Hatch, Carsten Croman. Hello and welcome everybody to our webinar today. Sorry, I was just hearing myself there. Sorry for the echo. We're today talking about what cutting-edge technology can bring to aquaculture. We're talking about AI. We're talking about homogeneous data structures, and what all our speakers have contributed on one side of the value chain at the beginning of it, from the Grieg Seafood perspective, and on the other side, where Yamaha can integrate their expertise coming from automation, coming from great hardware solutions, and also what early stage innovation can add to this. All right, let's start with you, Nolan. Tell us what you're up to.
Sure. So Nolan Paul, I'm a partner at YMV. Our venture group represents our parent company that you would probably know for things like motorcycles, outboard motors, motorboats. We were set up about 5 years ago with the mandate to really explore what the next frontier is for our company. Right out of the gate, food and ag was one of the areas that we thought that it was important for us to go after. And so we've been making a number of investments in the space on the agriculture side, plant crops. Last year, we added seafood broadly. And the reason for that is we have a marine group, makes up about 50% of our operating income. We, as a thesis, feel that seafood is best placed to capture the growing need for protein. And so we've been digging in for about a year, seeing where we can play. We as a venture group make early stage investments in startups. We know we don't know a lot about the aquaculture space. So we're here to listen, learn, really partner with folks like Hatch and others. But we do think that there's quite a bit of overlap we've seen from technologies being deployed into the ag space across the value chain that we think will be applicable to aquaculture.
All right, great. Thank you, Nolan. More from that a little bit later. Trond, say hello.
Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, I'm then the CDO and Chief Digital Officer in Grieg Seafood, a global company in the salmon, Atlantic salmon industry. We are employing about 1,000 people in the span of 17 time hours. So, well, we are globally distributed. Focusing on technology, utilization of data, and we have even put that as a vital component in our business strategy as such, actually to emphasize on how to do the smart thing with insight from data and technology. And by that, we are then focusing on how can we put sensors and technology to enhance our insight in biological characteristics in the water, having better control of the biomass, the growth, to control it, whatever it is. Yeah, obviously also monitoring environmental conditions that we need to have control over so that we can actually ensure that the fish is having a good life. A good life for the fish means also that it is eating as it should be, it is growing as it should, and all these aspects as well. And it's a huge focus on how can we introduce operational infrastructure to actually gain this sustainability around keeping the fish healthy and safe, and by that also gaining the best growth, and then the sustainable kind of production, gaining also economy and scale for the owners. So that's right. That's part of the setup here.
Thank you, Trond. Martin, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Martin is managing director at Bade and a real data what shall I call you? You're more than an enthusiast. You're an absolute professional. This is your area. I think actually Bada has hunted you down to lead their transformation into digital. Tell us a little about what you are pushing at Bada.
Sure, and thanks for having me. So Bada, as you know, has a history of some 101 years right now within the fish industry, which includes salmon and whitefish and pelagic, etc. So therefore, we are kind of traditional manufacturer of machines for processing. That's where we're coming from. But we always wanted to be, and we are kind of innovation leader for our customers. And innovation these days is all about data, digital, and software, right? So, which is quite interesting because when our customers are asking about, can I have a machine? Then we usually would say that's not the case anymore. Usually they would say, I like to have a machine within the process, and I like to know what the machine is actually doing in order to do optimization of my processes, including production excellence. That's the reason why we introduce a lot of sensors and why we do a lot of monitoring of data and also trying then to interpret these data for the best use. And these use cases are usually either, increasing production output, yield optimization, support of animal welfare, and of course, all about sustainability. The important thing for us in terms of, what we believe the industry could do even further is if it comes to openness. Today's openness of systems in terms of where to get the data and what kind of format the data is actually, what kind of protocol which we are going to use, what kind of apps which we are going to co-create, and what are we actually doing in some sort of a network with customers and partners, and not only seeing competition in front of us, is something which I think we all can learn about. So that means, in a nutshell, we already work with smart factories. We already have production systems in place. We already have many, many sensors within our processing machineries. We strongly believe that if we bring aquaculture production together with processing and maybe as the next step then back to retail, that we can change the game. That's the reason why we are heavily looking into data-driven systems across the value chain.
Very interesting. And our very own Carsten Krom, who I think founded Hatch 2 years ago on a very similar premise, right?
Kind of co-founded, Moritz, but yes, thank you. So yeah, Carsten Krom, managing partner at Hatch. Hatch is a 3-year-old aquaculture investment firm focused on the early stage technology firms that are out there that are trying to make the aquaculture industry more sustainable and profitable and more efficient. So as such, we look at global companies with innovation across the whole value chain of aquaculture, and obviously technology and digitalization is a huge part of that. And it's actually a bit of an emphasis from my point of view anyway on the amount of deal flow that we see in digitalization. So we have about 1,000 companies in our pipeline that we've built up over the last years, 1,000 startups that we monitor and try to follow as regularly as we can. And a huge part of that is in the digital space, and the digitalization obviously happens in all sectors, and aquaculture is also part of that. So what we do is we have an investment fund, and we make investments into startups, and then we have an accelerator model. Our latest program just started last week, Monday, going on for 3 months. Obviously this year all is different, so it's a remote program, but usually we do it in Hawaii, Bergen, and Singapore, which is our 3 office locations. And what we do there is that we help our companies to engage with more investors and with industry, such as represented here today by Trond and Martin, and the investor group represented by Nolan. And yeah, what I'd like to discuss today is how digitalization can be applied better in the sector and how it can be done more efficiently, because again, this overemphasis that I personally see in the space often leads to confusion, and it's difficult for me, who hasn't a digital background, unlike maybe Martin, to assess the quality of deals without the input of people with more experience in the field. So I'd like to get some insight on that.
Great, thank you, Carsten. I'd like to start the questions round, or the your sharing information round, with the only one here that actually makes the core thing that we are actually here for. Trond, Grieg Seafood, one of the now biggest salmon farmers in the world, certainly one of the most innovative ones out there. Your company has always been famous for smartly integrating, understanding where's the next step. And yeah, there are so many steps in especially salmon farming, or focusing around, and salmon farming with all the money is driving the innovation in this industry. Show us a little bit, talk a little bit about what Grieg has done recently to push the integration of data in the industry.
Could you please repeat the question? I got a call in, so you'd muted totally.
Oh, sorry, Trond. I was saying that Grieg Seafood is the only one here who produces fish, and but Grieg Seafood has always been a company that has been very forward in the innovation strategy. And you've recently, or have been constantly iterating on your own data optimization and looking for where can you see opportunity in this value chain that is quite complex. So a little bit of Aquaculture, a little bit of Grieg Cloud. What have you been up to?
Yeah, actually, there's a little bit of everything in the total value chain. It's actually starting with the genetics in a very early end, actually before the eggs coming in. And then we try now to identify where can we gain data in the total value chain, all the way to the retailer and even further on to the kitchen. Actually, that's the main goal for both our business, but also for the digital processes that will support the business as such. So it's a pretty broad kind of table to cover, so to speak. But obviously, where the most imminent values or benefits are to gain is in the freshwater production, as well as in the seawater production, because obviously there are the amount of uncertainties are the largest, and if you can observe, and the next step to control the environmental conditions that the fish is actually living in, then you can actually optimize the production line as such by controlling or manipulating some of the environmental factors. But to do that, you need also to actually be able to identify it in an early stage, meaning also that you have to look at indicators for changes in the environmental conditions, meaning also that you have to have machine learning and historical data to build your models and such. And obviously, if you see the trends, then you also should actually have operational infrastructure to manipulate it, to put up barriers of oxygen if it's algae that coming in, or what have you. If it's low oxygen, then how could you actually gain more oxygen into the pens in the sea, so that actually the fish have a better survival rate and actually can eat even, and all these aspects. So there are a lot of areas in the production line where we can actually utilize technology better. We have started. We see a tremendous maturity rate in the organization to actually see that, wow, they are now getting the belief of what we have been telling them for a few years, that if we focus on sensors, if we focus on getting accurate data, we can actually then give it to the data scientists making models, so that we actually can turn around this industry from actually running the business from looking in the aft mirror, the rear mirror, because that was actually the history before. They had gained older data, meaning data that was maybe 1 day, 1 week, 1 month old, to make operational decisions on. And that is very hard. And
Very
now
true.
we're in the conditions where actually we have the data that can tell us exactly the current status in close to real time or in real time. But then again, we are aiming, yeah. Sorry.
Aquacloud, Grieg Cloud.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Like, tell me what it is.
Yeah, the Grieg Cloud. The Grieg Cloud is our business platform. It is cloud-based, and we are storing all our data from sensors, from both automatically acquired, but also the data that we manually are acquiring still, because there is still a lot of manual acquisition there. But all data are stored there. Additionally, we also gather data from an ecosystem out there of vendors that are providing us with data from their sensors. And it's not only data as such, but it also insight to data. But then again, it's the vital discussions around who is owning the data, but we won't dwell with that here. The clue is actually that we we have said that open standards, open interfaces, APIs, industrial standards is the way to integrate with the industry as such. Not only Grieg Seafood, but all the other players. And there's where Aquacloud comes in. The Aquacloud, which is then a project with a lot of industry players are gathering around teams, different teams, but one of the main teams is actually how do we build a platform standardization for new technology coming in or existing technology that need to do an upgrade in their interfaces to be kind of compliant to how the industries have defined the standard should be. So Aquacloud is building an environment so that a young company or an upstart company can actually, in a few months forward, plug in their system, their new equipment or whatever it is, to verify that this is actually operational or compatible towards the industry standards that the aquaculture industry in Norway is actually utilizing. So that's yeah.
Thank you, Trond. Martin, from a BADA perspective, coming into this industry, wanting to integrate a data play together with a hardware play, how is this relevant to BADA?
I mean, let me build on what already Trond said, and it really echoes to me. So in terms of finding the right data, storing the right data, also having some manual data on whatever kind of PDF forms or so on is the first initial step. What we find within the market is that it seems that there's no single player who has all the data already available in one form of cloud or the other. This is like hard to find. So therefore, it all starts with getting the data, then storing the data and making the data accessible to those who can actually do something meaningful with the data. That's the reason why there's still a lot of discussion within the market whether we need additional monitoring, sensors, etc., in order to get more data. I think it's the next step of that is, understanding various sets of data means we have to do what it is called data regression. That means you get a set of 20, 25, 30 different data, and you have a feeling that these could influence, for instance, the environmental conditions. What you do with data analytics, you explicitly say that, for instance, the temperature of an ocean has 7.2% influence, whether the feeding process has, 12.1% influence. These are just illustrative numbers, right? And then what you try to do as a next step is to say, can we predict what we see here? Can we come up with a model? And then we talk about machine learning and very much kind of artificial intelligence kind of stuff, building up algorithms who can actually predict what you see today in terms of monitoring. And this is kind of hard, especially when we look into seawater, because there we have, and also with some sort of aquaculture farming, because some of the strong impacting factors are climate factors, like melting snow, for instance. And this is super hard to predict in terms of what's the actual outcome of a cage. So therefore, what I'm trying to say is it is possible to predict things, but it has maybe limitations. So that's what we are seeing. And we are dealing a lot with, availability of data, structure of data, and then putting some data scientists on it to do some interesting analytics of that. Second point of your question is, all the different kind of cloud systems upcoming, and I'm having this more or less on a daily basis, who's owning what data. And I always have the same answer: the data is within the ownership of a customer, full stop. So we as VADA, we never own the data. So if it's either Grieg or anyone else, who's owning the data? And that's the simple part of it. It's getting more tricky then as soon as we say who's doing something with the data. So assuming we would have a right to use data of someone, and we would build a particular application on top of that, right? Who's owning that application, right? Who has done this? Who was the innovator of that application? So, and then we talk about sharing of IPs. Is that IP then applicable to anyone else? If so, does the competition agree to this? Or would that give me an edge of innovation if I only have this for a period of time in terms of exclusivity? So therefore, it's more about getting something intelligent out of data, and who is then, so to speak, having the right of the IPs to it, which is actually building up the business model underneath. Then instead of saying, this data I'm giving you, but this data, no, I'm not giving you data. Because then the entire business model won't work, right? Then we don't do this in an openness environment anymore. And this is also how we structure our cloud business. So we also have an underneath cloud, but we are not promoting it as a cloud. Because for me, or for us, gathering data, applying standards to how the data is gathered, making data accessible to others, that's like the enabler thing. But the fun part in terms of providing value to customers or providing value to end users, that is all about making something with the data. And then you don't care too much about who's owning it anymore. Then it's all about who's owning the IP.
But Martin, when you say the customer owns the data, does it mean you can't even use them for other purposes?
I can. I'm saying, but the ownership of the data is with the customers, but I'm getting a right to use it.
All right. Okay. Sure. Yeah.
It's like what we have learned with software. So you're not owning my piece of software, but you I grant you a right to use my software, and maybe on a limited time, which means a year, and then you have to pay another license fee.
Right. So there's a certain element of license agreements in there. Good way of handling it so far. Data ownership, very difficult question. Nolan, you're coming from the ag tech side of things. I think Yamaha has been quite active, especially in the Asian field in that. I think you mentioned that data standardization or homogeneous data sets are more spread in the ag tech, especially more than in aquaculture. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I'm not sure I would say that, but I think the
my question writing is wrong. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I would say the challenge we've seen, the evolution of data. I mean, maybe to take a step back is we talk about the sensors and what type of data we should collect. We saw sort of startup or company 1.0 come around, about in 2010, in some cases before that. But a sensor startup is really just you're collecting some data, and okay, great. The problem is when you have 15 different startups that are collecting 15 different sets of data, trying to have a customer work with that's really hard. Working with 15 different teams, 15 different layers of data. But also sort of what data is valuable, and it's tough to build a business around just a sensor unless it's a very novel sensor, and that data is very important. And so what we've seen is the evolution of companies become from data sensor or being able to collect data, whether that's an environmental sensor or a camera from a visual standpoint, to then trying to say we're going to collect the data and analyze the data and provide it to a customer. And then the ultimate are the ones that are actually saying, we're going to collect the data, we're going to analyze the data, and then we're going to recommend an action or actually do an action, depending the type of company. What we have seen, though, from being able to standardize the data is it's still a long ways away in the agriculture side, as we've seen these companies start to integrate and can consolidate into more platform type companies. Still a long way to go, but you're now seeing these larger companies that are $1 billion plus in market cap be able to provide more of a package to a customer. And when you do that, you do get that standardized data. But I would say it's still a long way to go being able to integrate, because it's not just the sensors from the startups, it's also having to integrate that with the customer, and the customer has data that, that is very different just within their own company. So it's hard, and I think the other Martin and Trond can certainly speak to it much better than I can. But I would say it's a journey that we're still not there yet.
One thing about that, Nolan, because you're obviously looking for investments in aquaculture now, are you keeping that in mind when you select the companies you're exploring to invest in, if they have similar sets of data that you can match, or if you can clear up that rights issue beforehand? Or is that just a problem for afterwards and you look at the opportunity mainly?
Yeah, not really. I mean, I think for us, we get more excited about companies that have a vision to be a platform, or that we can see becoming a platform, particularly for us where we're investing at an early stage, high risk, but we're looking for a high reward. We like finding these early stage companies that are trying to solve a very real and valuable problem. And it can be very niche, but there's that vision to say, we do want to become that platform, that large thing that a Grieg can just work with, and it's solving most of their problems. And I think when it comes to the specific data itself and the form it's in, I think we leave that to the teams to figure that out.
Right. Yeah, I think when it comes to leaving to the teams to figure it out, Carsten also has some experience.
Yeah, I mean, to Nolan's point about or just generally, one thing that we've observed is that sometimes people sit back at home and do Google searches and then launch companies, usually digitalization companies, based on problems that they seem to see in the sector, but they don't have any idea about whether that's an actual problem or whether that's just someone writing a blog about something that then actually ends up to be not true. And so what we try to do, it's not always possible, because sometimes, or not always the only criteria, because sometimes you have outstanding teams that have nothing to do with the aquaculture sector that we still want to invest in, and that's sort of also our role, to engage them with the sector and educate them there. But what we try to do on average is that we work with founders that actually have knowledge about the customer they will eventually cater to. So for example, we just invested in a company called Smart Oysters, and the CEO there is a former oyster farmer and has now, or a couple of years ago, started selling farm management software to the oyster sector. And that so he's still an oyster farmer. That's the kind of credibility that I think makes a big difference at the end of the day, that you have to be close to the customer and understand the actual pain points in order for them to take a leap and actually buy what it is you're selling. Because it happens all the time that probably not just in the aquaculture sector, that people develop not with the customer, but kind of around the customer, or even beside the customer, and then that's usually not successful. And especially in digital, I have the feeling that this happens a lot. So we try to prevent that. But also, then maybe my question for Trond would be, and also Martin, what if you were to look at a startup, in an example would be biomass estimation, that what would you want from that company to specifically say to you, maybe more for you, Trond, to really make a difference in that kind of jungle of digital innovation out there? Is there anything particular that you would like to see in them that would make you really interested?
Obviously, you've touched into the basics here, because it's about deep interest into the industry that you're actually entering into. You don't need to have the specific experience so much, but you really have to show that this is something that I'm burning for. This is something I really believe in. And you have to connect to or with some expertise in the industry, so that you actually, when coming and presenting your idea to us as industry players, then there at least you have some basic understanding of where are the burning platforms in our value chain here. Because if you have done that and you can come up with something that is actually not necessarily being unique, but at least there are not that many players that are focusing on that specific area in the value chain, then you got our attention.
And maybe adjacent to that, so when you look at digital in farming, first of all, that's a thought. I mean, as I was trying to prepare for this webinar, I had this thought that I thought, well, it's actually weird to have, you know, a bunch of fish in a cage and then tons of digital equipment kind of surrounding them. But I guess this is where the world is going. But
it is in some way, this industry is in many ways special because we are operating, at least in the open cages, we are actually then operating in really rough environment, and the equipment that you actually are introducing to the industry needs to kind of cope with those kind of rough environmental conditions. That's one thing. The other thing is that it has to actually have a less stress factor towards the fish, because the more thing you are dropping down into the pen, the more obstacles are there down there, and that means that this kind of stressing up the fish, and also if you're taking it up and down all the time. So there are some elements here we actually need to take care of. So there's a lot of aspects to it that brings up other ways of solving issues. An example, a video camera in the pen. We are taking them up and down and maneuvering it down there to actually see where the fish is, how it behaves, counting them, calculating their size and everything like that. But the behavior, that might be, you can't use a camera that's looking for the behavior for the fish at the same time as you're using it for feeding. Then there are other sensors. Is it the echo sounders? Are there passive sensors? How can you actually get the full three-dimensional picture of what's going on in the vertical axis in the pen? But
what is the price point that you would, as if you look at Grieg's total budget, that you would allocate to everything that is digital, that is sensor based, that is optimizing the status quo in that respect?
It all depends on where and what you're coming up with. Where in the value chain, in the production cycles, that's one thing. Where are you covering a black hole in a way that actually nobody has looked into, or is this a key cost factor that you are able to reduce? If you were able to come up with a solution for the sea lice, and you can guarantee me and you can say that, yeah, this will solve it, you will reduce the sea lice problem by 80% first year, and here's the product, then the willingness to pay high price for that is pretty high, because it's tremendous costs connected to how we treat the sea lice problem.
Sure. So in digital solution to sea lice, okay, not many there, I guess. But one thing we also see that our companies have problems with defining the value for their product that they are selling to their customers, right? So farm management software, what does that actually save you as a customer compared to the status quo and typing in everything in Excel or whatever it is they do now?
But I think
that's
actually
a necessity.
I think actually the way to kind of solve that one is to have a tight dialogue with one or two customers and actually look into what is the cost factor, what is the control factor you actually have, and what can you contribute with the new solution, because there are willingness to pay as long as it's value for the buck.
Yeah.
All right.
Also to what you said, Trond.
Yeah.
You know, our clear approach is to say that if we as BARDA, if we do specific projects, they will be not done by us only. We always do them together with selected customers, always.
Yeah.
Because your problems or your use cases have to be understood. So we have to address your use cases. And either we come up with a solution together, or we say, well, this sea lice problem with 80% in year one, which is kind of would be a nice product, we would buy it immediately. But but you know, it's like doing it together with the customer means you can then ensure that there's a time before using that particular application and a time after, and then you can check it according to a set of predefined KPIs which you would like to optimize. Whether this is sea lice, whether this is the transport of fish in well boats, and then check what is the death rate, right? I mean, all the various KPIs you can think of. And this is usually how you then measure the success of a particular service or application if you do it together. If you don't do it together, and if you then think of investing into startups, as you asked, Carsten, you better invest into startups who have either this customer relationship or has customer background.
Yeah, because it's not easy. I mean, Grieg is special in that sense. What Moritz was also alluding to at the beginning, that they are very open to this kind of innovation. But many, the norm is that they're not, and it's difficult. And I also understand them, because I mean, Grieg is in a sense doing the dirty work, trying to establish those technologies, and then then they can just kind of start using it once it's proven. So kudos to Grieg for doing that. But it would be nice to see more established salmon farmers be a bit more open to working with specifically digital innovation as kind of first adapter.
I think actually the industry will come there. Just to note that we are not the only one that is forward-leaning within digital. There are other players out there, absolutely. So Salmar, Movie, Lerøy, Eide. There's a lot of them that actually have some digital perspective in the strategy. So by far. But what we actually are aiming for in our kind of digital journey is obviously a partnership. We are doing projects as partners. Remember one thing, the production cycle is 1,000 days. So that's 3 years, right? So if you can see a production-wise impact on something, then you have to be patient, and then you have to develop the partnership between the customer and the vendor, right? So there needs to be kind of a, depending on how new breaking technology we're talking about, obviously. Then we have to agree on how to approach, how to verify the value of this new technology or the new service or what have you. Meaning that also there is, for the organizations out there, needs to be able to take the responsibility of actually having the dialogue with the startups, because it is demanding and you're not guaranteed success, but you need to have the what we call in Norwegian the ice on the stomach. You actually have to kind of be calm and allow for failure, meaning that you have to do piloting in a very controlled aspects and control groups and all those kind of things as well. So there is a lot of risk taking in the history of this industry, big time. But one thing is taking risk for such things that you think you understand and you have a lot of experience in. Another thing is actually to take risk of something you actually don't understand. And I think that's where the majority of the mid-size or smaller industry players in aquaculture industry are kind of situated at the moment. So yes, there will be some players out there that are opening the doors and welcome you and saying this we want to do, but it's going to be in a perspective of that it is not a quick. There's not a quick fix anywhere, because the effect of the proof of concept will take you about 1,000 days.
Nolan,
So Nolan, those companies that are valued 1 billion, why are they valued 1 billion in agtech? Why don't we have any 1 billion digitalization companies in aquaculture?
Good question. Should they be worth $1 billion is maybe another question, but I think certainly some have. Well, look, some of it is because agriculture or ag tech, plant-based crops, it's been that wave of startups, I'd say, is probably 5 to 8 years ahead of the broader seafood space. It clicked off with Climacorp and Monsanto coming in and buying that for roughly $1 billion. That's the digital platform type of company. So there's time for sure, but I think it can come, right? I mean, the ones that have achieved it have been able to, really develop. It takes time, and then just with those just marketplace effects, they've been able to grow really rapidly. And you've seen in the agriculture space within 5 years, you've seen 3 or 4 of these companies go from startup to being worth over $1 billion. So it can happen in agriculture. Plant-based crops maybe is not quite as slow as the seafood space from kind of for that development cycle, but they're still long. And the challenge is why agriculture broadly, both seafood and plant crops, just takes longer than your typical tech is because you're dealing with things. It's uncontrolled environments. The growing seasons are long. And so if something goes wrong, you have to start over again, and or farmers want to actually see the whole life cycle and of a pilot, and then to fund these startups for 2 to 3 years just to show that they have something that's of value. It's tough to get that amount of capital into startups. So I think it's coming. I think to answer your question, Carson, it's just aquaculture from a startup tech standpoint is perhaps a little later than traditional than plant-based ag, but I do think the more controlled and the infrastructure in place, for example, for salmon will lend itself to being able to build these types of companies.
I can wait 3 years. That's good.
Okay.
And honestly speaking, and as you know, Carsten, we are looking into startups on a regular basis, whether they're doing biomass monitoring, whether they are doing harvesting optimization, etc., right? And we see more and more startups are coming up with interesting ideas in this particular area. So it just sometimes seems for them hard to get a partner. And as Trond said, they are the big ones, or the rather big ones, and they are already on the roads doing something, and they are maybe already have a selected set of partners. And then there are the smaller farmers, so to speak, who have very limited resources to play something for 3 years with a smaller company or a startup. I mean, it's a kind of dilemma situation at the end of the day. That's the reason why we as BARDA have decided to say, okay, fine. So that's something in which we can help, right? Because we can build up a team of data scientists and data analytics and doing funky stuff in the clouds, which maybe the smaller ones could never do, right? But if we do so, then we share what we do here, right? So it doesn't have to be exclusive for one, because then all the other ones wouldn't benefit from it. That's the reason why I like the principle of sharing in that regard.
Interesting, Martin, that you say that just now, because we're going to get into our question session now, and we have quite a few questions from our audience. Kamahu asks, what do we think about the fact that most actors try to set their own cloud gathering all data and making communication between other cloud tools quite difficult? So basically about heterogeneous versus homogeneous system architecture. Do you believe there needs to be eventually one player that everybody just gets the service from, which defines and then lets the industry talk to each other?
No.
Or do you think there's a way from the technology side to do this?
Yeah, so I would distinguish between storing data and exchanging data and then doing something with applications. So from my perspective, it really doesn't matter whether you store your data in cloud number 1, 2, 3, or 4. It doesn't matter, because it's a set of data. The question is how you describe your set of data. then we talk about contextualization of data. That can differ because there are no standards yet, right? And it could also differ from the way the kind of protocols you're using, whether you use something like OPC-UA or MQTT or whatever, right? So this could also differ, but there are standards upcoming. So this is the good news. And then actually take a set of data from Cloud 1 to Cloud 2. It's not a problem at all. These days, it's possible. The issue is that if you run a particular application, which is made according to one set of data, one structure of data, then this application won't work with another cloud because then it's cloud specifically made. And then for me, it's rather a question whether the application is being done right or wrong. But it's not a matter of having the capability of exchanging data between clouds.
Fully agree on that one. Fully agree on that one. And yes, and that's where we are aiming. I think actually all the aquaculture players in Norway, the salmon industry, are aiming in that direction. They're building their own kind of basic cloud platform, but with open interface standards. And then the Aquacloud 2.0 project, in this part project of that is this defining of the industry standards, which is actually then pointing to industry 4.0 open standards that say we should API should be either REST or what have you, and then on the protocol side it's OPC-UA and what have you, right? So that's the basic of it, and that's what mandatory. The different systems need to be able to talk these languages. Otherwise, they are actually out of business, seen from our industry players' side. And absolutely, but the problem we are facing, obviously, still is that the legacy systems within biological control still are on proprietary protocols, still are old and is definitely not made for this architecture that we are aiming for. So I fully agree with you on that one. So the first one that comes up with a good new developed straightforward platform within biological control, call me.
Right. Have your phone number at the bottom now, call in.
Yeah, right.
So here's a continuing on that topic, John and Martin. JB Detali is asking, what extent do you think new technologies can reduce feeding efficiency problems in sea cages? And he's directing that question towards telemetry, camera, computer vision to spot behavioral patterns. Is that an element you're looking into?
Definitely. We are doing that as we speak. So it is all about getting data from the feeding systems, getting data from all the environmental sensors, and also getting data from the biomass control sensors and algorithms that we are, and then putting this together and having the system, the integrated system, to actually be able to recommend the feeding profile. So you can actually you can say it in another way, the fish is automatically fed in an optimized way, depending on the changing environmental factors, the behavior of the fish indicating whether it's the fish starting to get filled up, or it's not that hungry, or it's too early, or it's too late, or it's too dark, on all these aspects to it. And then the aqua technician and the operator in the integrated operations center will sit there and monitor, and then just can overrule if this is not the right thing to do based on experience, or actually just let the system take over. Yeah. So this, we are not yet there, but this is actually not very far away.
All right, thank you for that. Regarding the cost of these innovations, I mean, it's driven by partly VC, it's driven by partly your own R&D investments or open innovation initiatives. Andrew James asks, are there any ways that the cost of these digital innovations can be shared with the entire value chain? And can aspects be marketed directly to the consumer as a differentiator? So do you get a price premium if you say, we've monitored this fish for feed efficiency? Or Nolan, on your side, do you believe that do you pick startups for investment that push these initiatives because you think they will get a premium at the end for their technology?
It's a good question. I can answer, at least from what we've been doing on the agriculture side, which is we certainly see a tremendous amount of value in taking that data across the value chain. Anything that can create value add, which typically ends up at the customer level, either from a higher quality, more consistent product, or sort of proof of provenance, depending on the market. So certainly, we think that's a big area. We've been investing in companies that look to do that. It's very hard to do that though, and really requires disrupting the value chain, because you have the status quo now where the players are in the market and product and money exchanges hands at various points. And when you do that, the incentives for what you need to show at that point to get paid is a certain thing. And so for a farmer to think about what type of data should be going to a consumer to drive value, I think really the only way that comes that's able to move forward is if the farmer is able to realize some of that value. And so it's trying to realign the incentives. And it's not always an easy thing to do. In fact, it's never an easy thing.
So if I may, I would like to, so to speak, give it a second try. So I think the idea to share costs across the entire value chain between B2B, coming from farmer, processor, retailer, all the way down to consumer, that is what we call, the food value chain network. It's a very interesting vision, and we believe in that vision. In order to share costs for development of these new, interesting, and maybe disruptive applications, all the way down to the consumer, is something which has not been proven today. So it is always easier to share costs between a defined set of partners, especially in these days where resources are always limited in terms of data specialists, et cetera. And at the end of the day, we have to ensure that we are also doing this for the business, and because we would like to stay in business. So therefore, there should be some sort of a return. If it is after 3 years, we are okay. But if it's after like 10 years, we will put a question mark behind that. So therefore, we just have to be very honest to ourselves, saying, so are there any commercial running business models available which are spending from, or which are going from, let's say, farmer to fork, coming from B to B to C, and in terms of platform business? And there are no business examples of that. All the given examples of the Ubers and the Airbnbs are consumer sharing principles. And if it comes to B2B, then we have other platforms. But it's like B2B to C is something which is nice to talk about, but it hasn't today proven that it's working.
No, that's correct.
One more question here from Emil, maybe one for Carsten and Trond to share. What species do you think are cloud ready at this point? Meaning, have the tech, the institutions, and resources available, and will salmon tech really transfer to these other species?
So non-salmon species, basically, that you think it would be ready?
Yes.
So I mean, shrimp, there's a tremendous amount, obviously, of whatever's happening in salmon is also happening in shrimp, but probably while salmon might be further along in the digitalization process, the market incentive for people innovating in shrimp is what is it, factor 5 or 10 or something like that higher than it is in salmon. So there's a lot that we see happening in shrimp, but obviously it's different. It's a very different farming, so it's different to transfer digital innovation from salmon to shrimp. But what I could see maybe would be yellowtail kingfish. That species is being found more and more, also on land now. Recirculation aquaculture systems popping up. It's reasonably, I think 150,000 tons or almost 200,000 tons farmed in Japan. And so that sort of maybe because it's a high value species, and certainly with high value comes more incentive in terms of reducing feed costs and the like. So that I could see maybe as a second market that might be ready.
All right.
Yeah, from my side, I agree with Carsten. Additionally, also, I think that we need to add one extra dimension, and it's governmental regulations. In typical areas where shrimps are produced, and there's not by far that heavily regulated as it is in Norway traditionally. And that also obviously had a big impact on how we regulate, how we operate, but also how we meet the increased demands of control from the government. And that's also one of the main drivers behind the digitalization in Norwegian aquaculture. But in addition to that, we can see the consumer, the younger consumers out there, they are pointing at food safety, kind of green wave, healthy food, and all that, those kind of things. And then it's about how to document the transparency and such. How can you document that actually this is a safe thing to put in your mouth? And that is also some kind of driver in the regulation part and the technology behind it, as far as I can see it.
Good point. One question to wrap this up, and also Trond, Carsten, I think this is going in your direction. How well do you think integrated sensors and cages are doing in terms of predicting the future harvest? So biomass estimation, how exact is that? And if you could tell us from your sensory prediction compared to your actual harvest, what's the difference here? How big is the gap?
Our experience is that we have increased the precision tremendously. Earlier it was about 10 to 15% of kind of wrongly estimation. But now we're down to, with the use of technology, we are beyond 1.5%.
So
and obviously extremely but increase in precision, and that means obviously that it has a huge impact on the processing sites, on the market as such, because all of a sudden the precision level out to the customer is actually higher. And there is a lot of benefits actually into this to increase the precision level. And the better you hit, the better price you can get at the end of the day.
All right. To wrap this up, I'd like to hear from everybody, starting with Nolan, especially from the VC perspective. What are you looking at right now as the biggest opportunities in salmon and AI, data automation, and especially from the Yamaha portfolio of technology?
Sure. I mean, real quick, it would be two things. One is broadly across all crops is a more hyper local management. So for the precision ag, it's an area that we've made a number of investments on in plant crops, and we see a lot of that technology being able to be applied into seafood. And then further downstream as well, to kind of to continue on this theme, you know, a lot of that data that's coming off the farm now how are you able to monetize that downstream? So on the post-harvest side as well.
Right. Thank you. Carsten?
Look, we've made 35 investments the last 3 years. Probably half of those are in some form of digital sensor type of application, and so we've placed our bets, I want to say, with that. So those are in you know, we've got everything between big data, biomass estimation, sensor plays with adjacent management software, feed formulation software, You know, I could go on and on. So we are pretty broad with this. I wouldn't be able to. I mean, everyone always talks about biomass estimation. If you really, like with most of these things, like we should also like what we like to do is we like to invest in companies that have technologies that could potentially, or teams that run these companies that could potentially look beyond just the aquaculture sector. Because if you drill in the very detail with a lot of the stuff we discussed today, from a venture capital perspective, there's often not much of a huge play. Just because you solve some small issue in a particular market, that often, you know, doesn't justify us paying, as we do, $1.5 million valuations as the companies enter our accelerator program. So we have to look at that, right? But that doesn't mean that these problems shouldn't be tackled, because obviously they make a good business for the people that run these companies. It's just not necessarily from a venture capital perspective case. But biomass estimation and anything around to what Nolan says, well, so precision farming, that we do look at, and we still like these fields.
Right. Martin, from the BARDA perspective, what are you looking at mainly right now?
I mean, as we are looking into what can we do in order to help our customers with understanding and maybe predicting the environmental conditions better, as they were doing today. And this is true for both aquaculture as also wild fish harvesting. That's number one. We are also looking into when then the harvested fish is actually going to processing. What does that mean in terms of processing? Because the more precise you're getting in harvesting, the better you can do in processing. And and then within processing, then the next very interesting step there, but maybe this is a little visionary because we haven't talked about this today, is all about what can be done if it comes to durability of food. And there are also interesting initiatives ongoing there, which could change the entire, so to speak, distribution chain of how fish is being transported today.
Right. Thank you, Martin. Trond, any thoughts on that from your perspective?
That would be the fish health monitoring, actually. Monitor the fish based on behavioral baseline. And by that, get early warning and predictions on potential disease, potential decrease in the fish health indicators as such. So, and that goes both for the freshwater and for the seawater cycles of the fish. So that's the next step for at least Grieg Seafood.
That'd be indeed great. If you find somebody good, then maybe call us too. Maybe we can do that together. All right.
We have a company that does that, but yeah. You know them.
You know, we'll call you, Trond.
That's fine. Perfect.
Sadly, we're out of time. We have a ton more questions. It might be that I circulate them with our speakers, so I give all our viewers a written answer. Thank you very much for watching today. Martin, Trond, Carsten, and Nolan, thank you very much for attending. Thank you to Yamaha for presenting this webinar today. And yeah, we're looking forward to continuing the conversation offline, and see you guys. Bye-bye.
Yeah.